Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the channel. If you're wondering why I'm wearing gloves, it's because with the dry air from the wintertime and me washing my hands 20 to 30 times a day thanks to my infant son, my hands have sort of just deteriorated into like some sort of rock creature look. So I figured you didn't want to see that on camera. I then decided to put my driving gloves on, which I've had for 7 or 8 years. They've actually held up extremely well, just to have your focus be completely on the optic itself. What we have here is a Promethean LP-1 from Lead and Steel. And in fact, Lead and Steel are the ones that reached out to me to send this demo unit in for review. So, Lead and Steel, thank you very much. If you're unfamiliar with what this is an American assembled holographic sight that's aimed to compete itself against the UH1 and the likes of some of the EOTech products. The price point on this is around $350 right now, but again, this is end of December. They've been on sale, I think, since November, and that price is only for a limited time, I believe. On their website, they say $350 to $450, so I'm assuming within the next couple of weeks or so, that price is going to shoot from that $350 price to $450. But regardless, that's still going to be considerably less expensive than the American-made options. Things like the EXPS, they're around $700, and the Huey Gen 2 is around $600. So even at $450, it's about $100 savings at the very least. So with all that being told, what does this box tell us about the optic? Well, it's first made out of 7075 aluminum, it's rated for 30,000 hours battery life, and it's a lower one-third co-witness. Now the 30,000 hour battery life is a little interesting because the box and the website say two totally different things. But I believe I'm going to go with what the website states, which is at level 3 of 8 on the brightness setting, for the full CQB reticle like this, they say it'll last 60,000 hours battery life. Whereas with the red dot itself, just a 2MOA dot, it lasts 150,000 hours at brightness level 3. That's a long time, almost to the point where you don't even need something like a solar panel. That's all thanks to the CR123A battery, which we're going to take a look at soon. As far as what the rest of the box can tell us, not a whole lot, except they do make the claim that you could shoot this under nods no problem, and it does have a QD lever, also proudly assembled in the US. The box itself is made out of a very dense cardboard, which I really like, and the foam inside is cut extremely well. Now, for whatever reason, there was no instruction booklet with this optic, but again, this is a demo unit. In fact, the serial number on this, I believe, is 11, just to show you how early production this is, and they've sent this out to several people to get reviewed, and I guess it might have just gotten lost in translation along the way. Comes with a little adjustment tool, which is nice. Can barely get it out with gloves on, and we get the optic itself. The only other thing you get is a little pack of silica and a little cleaning cloth. Now the first thing you're going to notice about this thing is just the sheer weight of it. It tips my scales at just over 12.5 ounces. The only other competitor I have to the LP-1 is my Holosun 512 Gold Dot. As you can clearly see, this is just over 4 ounces lighter than the LP-1, which is a considerable savings. And you can get these for around $350 or so. But this and this aren't supposed to be competitors. This is still a Chinese-made optic. This is touting itself as an American-made one. So we have to look at this in comparison to two of the other really big optics that you might cross-shop when you're looking at something like this. And that would be the likes of the EOTech EXPS series and the Vortex UH1 Gen 2, both of which come in at around 11.2 and 11.6 ounces respectively. So right in line with what this thing weighs, more or less. However, this thing is about half the price of what you'd find the EOTech 4 and about 2/3 the price of what you'd find the UH1 for. With all that being said, there isn't a whole lot to really discuss about this thing, but we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up. A little QR code over here if you want to scan that. I will try to get it where you can. I have no idea what that's going to say. Probably the instruction manual, which would be a really smart touch. But beyond that, we have a quick release lever on the side. You can see it is locking. Push this back, disengage the arm. The arm will go neutral in the middle. You could then push this over and make an adjustment on the side with this adjuster screw. Very similar to what we saw with the EOTech G30 magnifier. You have a pin. It's a little hard to see. A pin right there. And then you have little detents on the side on this little screw. Push over if you can. So it's a little trickier than it looks, especially when you're wearing gloves. But you push that over like so. and then you can adjust this wheel to put more or less tension on the cam when you lock this up on your pick rail. So nice little touch right there, and it feels really, really good. These are all steel components, so they shouldn't wear out or break. And listen, nice little satisfying click from the lock on the QD lever. I'm sure a lot of the weight from this thing comes from this shield on top. You could remove this with those 6 Torx screws if you so choose to give itself a little bit slimmer profile. Probably shed a couple of ounces as well, but I would personally not do that, because the reason why this is here is to just add extra protection for this thing if you were to drop it or hit it against something. On the right hand side, we have the compartment for the CR123A battery. Takes a long time. Big old fat O-ring putting positive pressure on the actual housing itself. You can see it right in the back. Very nice. Standard battery. You can buy these in bulk pack for not that much money. Made in the US of imported materials. Is a surefire. What's the expiration date on that? March of 32. So if you buy a pack of these for a couple of bucks, even if you spend a couple of dollars each on these, they have a shelf life of probably at least 10 years, which is a really, really long time. Throw one of these in your backpack where you're going to be keeping this thing, and you know what? If it ever dies, you just swap out a battery. Let's take a listen at the windage and the elevation turrets. Not a whole lot of sound, but a really good solid feel. I can tell exactly when it pops out of one detent and goes into the next. Honestly, you can't ask for much more than that. I believe these are half MOA clicks. For a holographic sight like this, they're more than precise enough. But they do have a good feel and a good, well-spaced detent, which is nice. You can actually tell exactly what's happening. You can see we have a little bit of distortion already looking through the glass, but it looks like there's almost no tint on it. In fact, let me put it up against a white sheet of paper. You can see this ever so slight, maybe like a bluish green tint. Now, a little bit of shift going on, but very, very minimal. From the front, you can see we have some red reflective tint. And on the same side as where we have the QD lever, we have the 2 buttons. I like that they're on the side and not on the back, because if you use this in conjunction with a magnifier, you don't have to worry about not being able to get to your buttons if they're back here. Now, the operation of this thing couldn't be any easier. It's off, push the up button to turn it on, down to go down on brightness, up to go up, up, press and hold for 3 seconds to shut it off, turn it back on, as you can see, and press both buttons simultaneously to cycle through the reticles. And that's it. There's no auto off. It's just turn on and use it. To turn it off again, press and hold the up button. And that's it. With all that being said, it feels really nice. It looks really good. The finish on this is great. The serial number on the bottom, like I said earlier, is number 11. So this thing is a very early production model. As far as the emitter from the front, yes, you can clearly see it. Press and hold for 3 seconds to shut that off. And that's basically it. I really like how this looks and feels, and you know what? You could use it with gloves really easily. It's a fairly well laid out little piece of kit. Anyway, with all that being said, let's get behind this thing and see if it actually performs as good as it should. Minimum brightness, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Maximum brightness. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. There are only 8 brightness settings to this thing. Fortunately, on maximum brightness down here, it is more than bright enough. In fact, it's a little bit too bright, but it does help to leave it a little bit brighter, because on camera, red dots and holographic sights usually don't seem as bright as they do to the naked eye. Pew pew! Pew pew! So to the naked eye, this will appear slightly brighter than what you're currently seeing here before you. It's also a little bit easier for the naked eye to pick up red dots or holographic sights on really bright white walls like this. For whatever reason, on camera, it just doesn't translate to a perfect representation of what you'd see to the naked eye. I found the brightness on this thing to be more than adequate. Even in the bright sunny daylight that you'll be seeing soon, it's more than bright enough. However, it doesn't get ultimately as bright as some of its competition. The CR123A battery on this thing is pretty fresh, but even if this thing was left on for a very, very long time, the battery life on it, pew pew, pew pew, should not really make that much of a difference, because leaving it on power setting 3 of 8 is good for, in this form, about 60,000 hours, which is a few years. In fact, that's almost 7 years with this reticle setup. At power level 3, that's nearly an eternity. Granted, level 3 is pretty dim, but you know what? Again, to the naked eye, in most environments, with the exception of being out in the desert, it'd probably be more than bright enough. Pew pew pew! Now, I was going to film a reticle overview with this thing like I do with all other optics, but truth be told, for this thing it doesn't really make that much sense, primarily because it's just a very simple optic. There isn't a whole lot to really talk about. There's no auto off, there's no shake awake, it's on, off, 8 brightness settings, and yes, you do get 3 reticle options, but it's very reminiscent of a Holosun and it works exactly the same way. I'll splice in a little ad at that soon. But for right now, here in this laundry room clearing, it functions flawlessly. Out from the darkness and into the light, we take a look at this thing under bright sunny conditions. And like I had mentioned earlier, the brightness on this thing is pretty adequate. I swapped it out with another battery that I had for my rangefinder, and it was about the same brightness. Basically, to the naked eye, I couldn't tell the difference. However, what it lacks in slight overall maximum brightness, it more than makes up in the flatness, the sharpness, and the clarity of the glass. It is beautiful. It is a perfectly flat image. The only time you will see any sort of minor shift, like we saw earlier with paper on my table, is when you're really off to the extremes. But that's so minute even still that you'll never, ever really notice it. The color representation through it is extremely true to form, and there is that ever so slight bluish green tint, but you really have to be looking for it to spot it. The window through this thing is also quite large. I will roll in the UH1 and the 512 Holosun very soon, but take solace in knowing that this thing is pretty big. Now, I do not have any good footage from the EOTech to showcase, just because I tried going through my videos and none of them were up to the standards that I currently live by. So instead of trying to polish a turd, I figure I'll just leave it out and hope that one day someone sends me in a brand new EOTech for review. Magnifying it, however, shows that we have a bit of an interesting little debacle with the reticle. Not so much the circle, but the fine dot in the middle. Very similar to what we've seen with many Holosuns over the years, that center dot isn't as sharp as I would like to see. There's no reason why it shouldn't be sharper than what it currently is. It's not a perfect round circle, it's more of a, I'm going to have to call it again, a rugby ball. It's just a little bit wider than it is tall. Those little striations on the side are a little frustrating. The rest of the circle itself seems very sharp and clear. So I know it's not the entire reticle, but just that friggin' center dot. It just frustrates me. Is this a deal breaker? Absolutely not. But it absolutely is something to take note of. Every other Holosun I've ever reviewed has done the exact same thing. And just for reference sake, I am using the Holosun HM3X, which is basically a perfect magnifier. I mean, just look at the rest of the image. It is basically flawless. Cycling through the rest of the reticle, you can see we go from a 2 MY dot to just the circle. Again, had the exact same issues. And when we lower down the brightness a little bit, it does get better, but it also gets extremely dark. One thing to note with the brightness settings is because there are only 8 settings from top to bottom, when you do go and make an adjustment with it, it does have a very large jump from one brightness setting to the next. So that is something to take note of. As for the rest of the glass on this thing, it's basically perfect. Look at how clear, sharp, and bright that image looks. Even behind a magnifier, it looks excellent. Now let's put this up against one of its main competitors, the Gen 2 UH1 from Vortex. Like I had already mentioned earlier, they're going to be pretty close competitors. Even though the Vortex is going to be about $150 more expensive, it's going to be about an ounce lighter, have a dedicated night vision button, and have that sweet, sweet Vortex warranty. And though the illumination already seems a little bit brighter on the UH1, just notice how much more green tint we have on the glass. Now, I don't pan across the power lines with the UH1 as I did with the LP-1 just now, but the UH1 still has really good looking glass to it, very little parallax shift. The biggest thing here is the takeaway on the brightness of the reticles. I mean, yeah, I am cycling through the brightness on the LP-1, but that's as bright as it was getting. I really didn't do this thing as much justice as I would like with a brand new battery, but unfortunately I thought I had a spare, and the only spare I had was a slightly used one from my rangefinder, but again, there was no real difference between that battery and the battery that came with it. If that's going to be a deal breaker for you with this LP-1, then you might have to look elsewhere. But honestly, again, it doesn't show up as good on camera as it does to the naked eye. Now here, the Huey is paired with the primary arms LER Gen 4 3X and the HM3X behind the LP-1, so they are going to be slightly different eye boxes. But regardless to that fact, the glass clarity is much better, the colors are much better with the Promethean. There's no doubt about it. And the reticle is really grainy on the UH1, but look at how sharp that center dot is. And that was going to be the case no matter what. I did put the LER behind the Promethean and it performed exactly the same way. Let me make a little bit better comparison. The Holosun 512 versus the LP-1. They're about the same price right now. The LP-1 again about $350, but the 512 is regularly found for mid 300s to low 300s. The view through them are both identical. You could see basically from where the zero is to the right and the left about the same through it. But the body on the 512 seems significantly smaller. They're both perfectly set up to be used in conjunction with the Holosun HM3X magnifier as you see here. Looking through this, despite the fact that the 2 MOA dot on the 512 is still not perfect, it still seems a lot sharper than what the Promethean can perform at. There is a little bit more tint to the glass on the Holosun, but again, that's not that much of a deal breaker given the rest of the performance of the thing. It's also a few ounces lighter and technically a little bit less expensive, but they are made in China, so if you are proud to buy things that are American made, then that might sway your vote just enough to go with the LP-1. Moving on to my home away from home, the sun's already pretty low in the sky. It's a little bit later in the day, dead of winter. And here we go from bright sun to very dark shadows, and the reticle is perfectly fine to pick up. I really didn't find myself saying, I wish this got brighter. Yeah, would it be nice if it did? Sure, it's always nice to have that one extra level of brightness just in case you need it for whatever sort of situation you might come across. But where it is right now is probably where I leave it for the majority of my time using it. In fact, all the shooting that I did with it in this environment, I left it exactly where it was and I had no qualms with it. But it's absolutely going to be getting a ding on its overall grade, primarily because it would be nice to have that 9th brightness setting. The jumps on this thing going from top to second from the top to third from the top are so huge that out here, as you just might have seen, it basically turns invisible after just 2 brightness settings farther down. If you aren't well versed in what holographic sights are, they perform a little bit of witchcraft, because no matter where the optic is in relation to your eye, the reticle will maintain the exact same size. Here it's basically all the way out, about 17 inches from the front of the camera. I can move it from that far out to literally right on top of the camera, and it's going to be the exact same size reticle. It also is parallax free, supposedly, and there is no adjustment whatsoever to make the reticle sharper to your eye with an eyepiece that you'd find on some other prisms or basically any other magnified optic. Now that might sound great and all, but the problem is if you have an astigmatism, it might not be as clear to your eye. I do have an astigmatism despite the fact I've had laser corrective surgery, and some red dots still perform a little bit better than others. With this, to my eye, it was perfectly fine. When I did run it with the magnifier behind it, I thought it was my eye playing tricks on me. It just turns out that it wasn't, it was just the reticle. Here at 50 yards, you can clearly see there's a little bit more shift to the image than what we saw on my desk earlier in the video. That's because we're at 50 yards, not 5 inches, and you can see the emitter from the front, albeit it's going to be so dim you'll probably never even notice it. It's not really that much of a concern in most cases for me, but for you, if you're looking for something that's going to be a little bit more discreet, just note that you will see it ever so slightly in the front. Closing out this video, my final thoughts is like this. Looking at it from an external standpoint, this thing is extremely well built, has very good controls, and is very easy to operate. I like how simple it is. It's just 2 buttons, an elevation and a windage control, and a QD lever. That's it. If you're cross-referencing this with an EOTech product or a Huey or a Holosun product, All of them have their pros and cons. The con for this, the biggest one, is I'm going to probably say it's the illumination brightness. Though I didn't have a problem with it, I would love to see this thing get a little bit brighter. And maybe if I had a brand new out of the box battery, it would get brighter. But to think that this thing has 60,000 hours battery life at level 3 on the full reticle like this, the people that might have used this thing before me, or even how little I've used my rangefinder, not that much, they would have had to have used it for years before it could have probably brought down the battery life far enough to where it'd be noticeable on the maximum brightness level. The next biggest ding on this thing's part is the weight, but it's not by much. The weight's only about an ounce heavier than the Huey or some of the EOTech products. By the time you put on a riser plate on a EOTech, it's going to be at least as heavy as this. The pros on this thing are, well, simply, it's so simple to use. The QD lever on this is excellent. Easy to adjust, locks up really, really tight. And that claw that locks in the QD lever is very positive. It's very reassuring to know that it's in there, 100% solid, and it's not going anywhere. And the reticle is really nice, with the exception of that little bit of oblongness to the center dot. The fact that you can adjust it from a center dot to a ring, or this dot and the ring like a Holosun product, is a nice touch, and one that I wish all manufacturers would start really getting on. Because for some people, they prefer just a dot. Some the whole shebang, and some just the ring if you want to put it on a shotgun. Or if you just want to bump fire it from the hip. Well, at that point, I guess you wouldn't really need an optic. Whatever the case is, it's nice to have the option of it. No, this thing doesn't have a dedicated night vision button like the Huey Gen 2, and I'm sure under nods it's going to struggle a little bit compared to the EOTechs, considering Hoplophile says that the EOTechs are the benchmark for being under nods. However, I can't discredit it that much, because just look at how beautiful the image is through a magnifier on this thing. It's literally like you're looking through nothing. It's an excellent, excellent performance, but it is slightly hindered from that reticle. It doesn't meet the rest of the qualities of this holographic sight. I really do need to give it to the ladies and gentlemen that work at Lead and Steel. This is an excellent first take at a holographic sight like this. I don't know how involved they were with the design. I don't know who they subbed out the work to. I don't know a lot of that stuff. But whatever they ended up doing, I think they did an excellent job. Yeah, I do have a couple of nitpicks, but I have nitpicks on a lot of things. I'm sure in time this thing will come out with an eventual Gen 2, and if they could fix the nitpicks, even increasing the price slightly to $500, let's say, it would be an even better optic than it already is. But as it stands currently, this is still a pretty damn good option, especially considering this thing is assembled in the US. For a lot of people, myself included, that means a lot to me. I'm very proud to be American, and I'm proud to have quality stuff made by people that hopefully care a little bit. And it's nice to know that hopefully it's going to create jobs in this country to help stimulate the economy a little bit. As a first take on a holographic sight, this is a very good performance. I really do like this thing. And you know what? I want to hear from you guys and gals out there who have bought one of these. What is your experience with it? Because this thing hasn't been out for that long, so thus its track record is extremely, extremely short. So please let me know in the comment section below what your experience is with yours if you do have one. What would you like to see done on a Gen 2 version of this? Would you like to see what I've mentioned already, or would you like to see a couple other things added onto it? Or maybe even subtracted from it? Beyond that, my recommendation for this thing is, if you can find one for $350, if you're in the market for one, I'd give it a go. I can't vouch for their longevity, I can't vouch for their warranty, but so far it's really so good. And there you go, we've made it, ladies and gentlemen. Under 25 minutes for this review. I ran it a little bit. I'd really love to torture test this thing, drop it a few times, submerge it in water, really see what it's capable of doing, but I'm pretty sure Lead and Steel would not be very happy about that. But regardless to that, a huge thank you to Lead and Steel for making this video possible, and a huge thank you for all of you out there for watching my channel and helping it keep growing. For that, I truly am grateful. Have a very happy and safe New Year. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.